All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is the comprehensive study of Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Sorry if I sound a little off. Um, I'm on my university campus with my laptop, so I don't have the same setup as I did with the previous episodes where I was at my house during the summer between semesters. A little bit different setup there. Gonna try for a little bit better of a setup, but I just wanted to test it today because this is the day where, when more people are available, we're going to be meeting Saturdays around 5 p.m. Took me a little while to get this set up, so you can probably see the time on the screen. It's a little past 5, almost 6, but it is what it is. I'm glad I got it figured out. We can get going. I'm going to do this one myself today. Nobody else has joined us, but that's all right. Like I said, more of a test period anyway today, and hopefully, now that I have a little set up, hopefully I can get a little bit more gear going next time with more microphones and hopefully a webcam. And I'm in a nice room right now with a chalkboard, so we'll get that going next time too, ideally. So yeah, that's sort of what's been going on with that. What the deal is right now, and can get into the Kant. Why not? Let's get into the Kant. So. We're on the third part of the introduction. Oh, actually, yes. Sorry, before we get into the Kant, one more thing I want to specify. We are changing translations for what I'm hoping will be one last time. As you can see, the screen setup is different than the other times because one of my friends, Ben, he's actually in this study. He joined us last time. He suggested because I wanted to use this edition since it's the more quote unquote academic edition and whatnot. And he recommended that I upload pictures and just put them on the screen instead of trying to find some weird translation where it's like accessible. But I don't know, it didn't look great. I mean, not going for production value or anything necessarily here, but this does look a little better. I think should be easier to follow, and it's a better edition in an accessible way. So thank you, Ben, for that idea. And we'll yeah. So this is the Wood and Geyer edition. Alan Wood, Paul Geyer, the translators. Uh, this is their edition, and we're picking up from where we left off in the last translation. It's the equivalent. It's a different title, so the titles are going to be not following the other translations that we used so far, but it's still the part 3 of the B edition, right, of the Critique of Pure Reason. The second edition, Kant released, I believe it was in 1787. It's a little bit more of an in-depth introduction than his first edition. Which is sort of helps sets up the scope of what his project is, and that's sort of what we'll be going over today. That's what he's actually going over the project a little bit right here in this first page, and as it was, we'll continue on. So the other page is going to look like. Hopefully there are okay photos. I noticed actually, interestingly enough, if you zoom in, the quality goes up, which is kind of strange because in all my experience, usually zooming in sort of increases the pixel count. Oh, it's probably because it's not the default um, uh, resolution or whatever the word is I'm looking for. So, all right. So yeah, we're going to be talking about more of the stuff today. So yeah, that's great. Without any further ado, let us get into the Kant. So, philosophy needs a science that determines the possibility, the principles, and the domain of all cognitions a priori. So I'm just going to read it, and usually we'll like take turns reading it or have other readings and have discussions either before. We usually try to go through the whole thing and try to have discussions. So since there's nobody else here with me today, I will simply just just read it and talk about it. So probably will be a shorter thing too, shorter entry, but that's okay, and we'll pick up further on next time, hopefully with more people. So here we go. I got a physical copy here. Let me just get that nice set up. All right. But what says still more than all the foregoing is this, that certain cognitions even abandon the field of all possible experiences and seem to expand the domain of our judgments beyond all bounds of experience through concepts to which no corresponding object in all can be given in experience. And precisely in these latter cognitions, which go beyond the world of the senses, where experience can give neither guidance nor correction, lie the investigations of our reason that we hold to be far more preeminent in their importance and sublime in their final aim than everything that the understanding can learn in the field of appearances, in which we would rather venture everything, even at the risk of erring, would then give up such important investigations because of any sort of reservation or form. I'm sorry. Or from contempt and indifference. These unavoidable problems of pure reason itself are God, freedom, and immortality. But the science whose final aim in all its preparations is directed properly only to the solution of these problems is called metaphysics, whose procedure is in the beginning dogmatic, i.e., it confidently takes on the execution of this task without an antecedent examination of the capacity or incapacity of reason for such a great undertaking. Now, it may seem natural that as soon as one has abandoned the terrain of experience, one would not immediately erect an edifice with cognitions that one possesses without knowing whence, and on the credit of principles whose origin one does not know, without having first assured oneself of its foundations through careful investigations, thus that one would allow all the more have long since raised the questions how the understanding could come to all these cognitions a priori, and what domain, validity, and value they might have. And in fact nothing is more natural, if one understands by the word natural that which properly and reasonably ought to happen, but if one understands it by which it usually happens, then conversely nothing is more natural and comprehensible. Actually, you know what? It probably should be easier for me to read off the page. Comprehensible. Then that this investigation should have long been neglected. For one part of these cognitions, the mathematical, has long been reliable, and thereby gives rise to a favorable expectation about others, as will. Let me zoom in here a little more. As well, although these may be of an entirely different nature. Furthermore, if one is beyond the circle of experience, then one is sure of not being refuted through experience. The charm in expanding one's cognitions is so great that one can be stopped in one's progress only by bumping into a clear contradiction. This, however, one can avoid if one makes his inventions carefully, even though they are not thereby inventions any less. Mathematics gives us a splendid example of how far we can go with a priori cognition independently of experience. Now it is occupied, to be sure, with objects and cognitions only so far as these can be exhibited in intuitions. The circumstance, however, is easily overlooked, since the intuition in question can itself be given a priori, and thus can be hardly distinguished from a mere pure concept. Captivated by such a proof of the power of reason, the drive for expansion sees no bounds. The light dove, in free flight, cutting through the air, the resistance of which it feels, could get the idea that it could do even better in airless space. Likewise, Plato abandoned the world of the senses because it sets such narrow limits from the understanding, and dared to go beyond it on the wings of ideas in the empty space of pure understanding. He did not notice that he made no headway by his efforts. He had no resistance, no support, as it were, by which he could stiffen himself, and to which he could apply his powers in order to put his understanding into motion. It is, however, a customary fate of human reason and speculation to finish its edifice as early as possible, and only then to investigate whether the ground has been adequately prepared for it. But at that point, all sorts of excuses will be sought to assure us of its sturdiness, or also, even better, to refuse such a late and dangerous examination. What keeps us free of all worry and suspicion during the construction, however, and flatters us with apparent thoroughness, is this: a great part, perhaps the greatest part, of the business of our reason consists in the analyses of the concepts that we already have of objects. This affords us a multitude of cognitions that, although they are nothing more than illuminations or clarifications of that which is already thought in our concepts, though still in a confused way, are, at least, as far as their form is concerned, treasured as if they were new insights. though they did not extend the concepts that we have in either matter or content, but only set them apart from each other. Now, since this procedure does yield a real a priori cognition, which makes secure and useful progress reason without noticing it, under these pretenses surreptitiously makes assertions of quite another sort, in which reason adds something entirely alien to given concepts, and indeed does so a priori, without one knowing how it was able to do this, and without such a question even being allowed to come to mind. I will therefore deal with the distinction between these two sorts of cognition right at the outset. All right. As usual with Kant, even shorter sections can be quite beefy, so to speak, in vocabulary and density, conceptual density. Let's try to break this down. Let me just make sure this recording is... Yep, all right. That looks all right. So, we start out with, right, talking about experience and sort of going beyond it, right? Abandoning the field of all possible experiences. Let me zoom in on the page. It'll probably help. Abandoning the field of all possible experiences. So, as I've referred to and others have referred to in previous sessions of reading this, right where we are in the history of ideas, this conflict between setting knowledge and experience versus going outside of it. And there are motivations for doing both. Later on, right, he brings up Plato, right, because Plato thinks that the world of the senses, it sets such narrow limits for the understanding, right? Especially, and he brings up mathematics, right? Splendid example of how far we go. A priori cognition, right? Independently of experience, necessary thoughts, right? Necessary. It's mathematics, right? 1 + 1 = 2. Necessary judgments. These aren't just arbitrary figments of our imagination. There's something of value there beyond experience, and that's what Kant is really interested in exploring. But those aren't the only things, right? Mathematics. He names these very key points: God, freedom, and immortality. These are things beyond our experience, right? That we want to grasp an a priori understanding of, a necessary, right? That's the whole goal behind, right? The science, he calls it, metaphysics. We want to use metaphysics, like, going back to the history of ideas, right? Before Kant, Descartes, right, wanted to prove God using metaphysics, deducing him using the science of the understanding of a priori, right? Necessary. He claimed God was necessary, and Spinoza, right? It was built upon that and was huge with that. I could probably bring up other things, but I don't want to extend this one too long. I think that's a pretty straightforward idea, but bringing up other philosophers' works alongside this one could be an interesting concept, and maybe if we get more people around who are into that, we can try that another time. But right, Descartes, Spinoza, all these theologians, right? Aquinas before them, especially. There were others. Aquinas is the first one that comes to my mind, trying to prove God through necessary, like deductions through, via reason. And freedom and immortality, right? Immortality of the soul, another huge religious concept, along with God. People trying to claim necessary, trying to deduce it through reason. The dialogues of Plato, right, and Socrates, they were trying to say, hey, we have a soul, and there's a lot more on that, which I'm not familiar too much on in ancient Greece, so I'm going to stay away from that. But the point is, they wanted to deduce these freedom's a little, to be honest, something I less know about in the history of ideas, so I'm not going to do my own horror here. This is, having other people would be helpful for this. But freedom still, right, an important when Kant calls, he goes into this more practical reason, where it's, sort of a more experiential thing. But we want it to be necessary, right? Freedom, because we claim it's so necessarily important, right? In U.S. Constitution, John Locke, freedom, freedom of revolutionaries all over culture. It's a huge thing, freedom. People want this. We like to think, right, this is necessary, right? As a human being, it's a necessary natural condition, freedom. That's, if it's necessary, it's a priori. So the science in which we're going to investigate this is metaphysics. I feel like I might have went on a little long with that point. Not too hard to understand, but it's so very important because this is what Kant wants to tackle in his whole work, because he's trying to figure out God, freedom, immortality. How can we do it, right? Because he has a problem with metaphysics, right? There's a reason he's writing this book. He's not just saying, oh, this is how it is. This is some like metaphysics 101 textbook, right? He's critiquing it here. He calls it dogmatic. Why? It confidently takes on the execution of this task with an antecedent examination. Little beefy terminology there, but antecedent examination, right? What comes before it? What comes before metaphysics? That's what that means, in this sense at least. And then we have to judge the capacity or incapacity of reason for such a great undertaking. Can we talk about God, freedom, and immortality just like that? What goes before metaphysics? What comes before that? We need to do a critical examination of metaphysics and of our reason to even determine if we can talk about God, freedom, and immortality. And that's huge, right? And then before that, people were doing that, right? David Hume attacking. We talked about him. I remember in the last implementation of this series, right? He caused huge problems. He investigated. He did an antecedent examination, right? Treatise on human understanding, calling out cause and effect, right? Is just this sort of arbitrary relation he thought it was, and that's huge. That affects God, freedom, and mortality, because if it's not cause and effect, and we can't really know anything, right? Ends up in skepticism. I'm giving a very, very brief overview, but we talked about it more last time, so you can look at that, and you can read some David Hume too. He's very accessible, which is nice. And he causes huge problems for us because of his antecedent examination. So, let's see here. Man seemed to have abandoned the terrain of experience, but not merely. Let's see here. Nothing is more natural. If one understands the word natural. What's natural here? Just trying to catch us up here. Charm. So yeah, he sort of talks about how far we can go with our reason here. We can come up with lots of nice things, right? So long as we don't run into contradiction. Contradiction changes a little bit later on with Hegel, but before we get into changing logic, right? Especially Kant later on, he'll stick with very traditional, like Aristotelian logic. So long as you're not running into contradictions, right? And you're making sound, valid arguments, things learned in, things like logic courses. This sort of reason can take you far, right? Beyond experience. He brings up mathematics as a splendid example. I brought that up before, but when we do have these a priori cognitions that are beyond experience, it can take us far. And mathematics is a great example of that. And that's developed independently of experience, but it helps us in experience. And we can even make necessary judgments outside of experience. That's to my understanding, the appeal of like pure mathematics, right? Like, who the hell cares about the fucking application of it, right? It's so cool. It's necessary. We're exploring, we're using our reason to deduce these necessary truths. This is what inspired Pythagoras, right? And other mathematicians of old and current and contemporary and of all time. Mathematicians are so into these necessary connections we make in our head, right? Logicians, that's what they're all about, necessity and judgments of those sort. It can take us far, Kant is saying here. He's pointing that out. Mathematics is an example. But he also critiques it a little bit here, right? It can't take us, even though it allows us to go beyond the narrow limits, right, of sense experience and a posteriori experience. A posteriori knowledge, rather. We still need to have something, right, holding us down. We can't just infinitely go on forever and making all these claims about what? God, freedom, immortality. We need to have something holding us here. We can't just go willy-nilly with all that. We're going to be coming up with crazy ideas and crazy arguments, and we got to make sure we're a priori, right? We can't just make sure we're abstract or beyond experience. We got to keep it there and make sure it's knowledge. This is a work of epistemology just as much as metaphysics, critique of pure reason. We got to make sure we're knowing things, right? And they got to meet criterion, which we'll explore a little later on. But we can't go willy-nilly, and we can't go all over the place. We need some boundaries. for Kant. I'm trying to. Yeah, because when Plato, right? Plato didn't do that, and he got into the world of the forms, and then Aristotle had to criticize him, and Kant's little brief critique here, right? He didn't notice he made no headway by his efforts, no resistance, no support, by which he could stiffen himself. This is all very analogous language, not literal. But right here, right, he couldn't put his understanding to motion. If we just come up with these vague, abstract ideas, we're not going to be able to put anything into motion, right? We're not going to be able to make any necessary judgments about reality. We're not going to be able to have knowledge. We're not going to be able to have God, immortality, freedom, or anything, right? Without putting these ideas into motion, really seeing where they fit into the necessary schema of our knowledge and just metaphysics and reality and all that beautiful epistemological metaphysical science. Keeps freedom. So he talks about a great comfort we have, right? A great what did he just say? I just lost the word already. I lost the word. But Kant's basically saying here at this letter part of the second page of the section here, it's we have great comfort, right, in reason being applied to objects, sense dependent judgments, right? Like table is brown, sky is blue. These are we feel very certain in these. We don't have to worry about the sort of abstract wanderings that we might run into when we're moving ourselves from experience. Right? Experience sort of grounds us in certainty, so to speak. That's when we apply concepts to objects. Those are sort of judgments we make, right? Empirical objects. So let's see here. Last little part. Where's the better go? Oh, okay. I want to make sure it wasn't going to just immediately die on me in the middle of the recording. So that's the thing. We can make real a priori cognitions with objects. When we apply concepts to objects, it's going to be a huge thing. When in the upcoming part, the transcendental aesthetic, which I believe immediately follows the introduction. Let me see if I can flip ahead here and verify that. Yes. Well, it's the transcendental doctrine of elements. Yes, the transcendental aesthetic. So after that, immediately after this introduction, we're going to be talking about concepts and applying them to objects and how it yields real a priori cognition, right? A priori, necessary. It yields real necessary cognition, knowledge, right? Necessary. That's what we're after. And that's it makes secure, which makes secure. So progress, reason. That knowing how to. So he's going to deal with different kinds of a priori cognition. We're going to talk more about these judgments we make when we apply them to objects, right? When we apply concepts to objects. So that's essentially the core of what I want to get at. I know there's a bit I'm skipping over, but that seems to me the core of what at least I want to explore in this section. So yeah, really just about emphasizing that difference between abstract knowledge, right? Removing from experience and still looking for that necessity. It's a dangerous game, right? We can make the mistake Plato made, that Aristotle had to fix, right? And that Kant critiqued as well. It's where we can very easily just in this sort of dilly-dallying, right? In abstract ideas, we can lose that a priori necessity that makes knowledge and truth. And I mean, I'm just using kind of terms all over the place. These things, especially in Kant's terminology, will come to have very specific meanings that probably shouldn't be used there. But I'm trying to get the idea across. It's important that we maintain this necessity in our judgments versus just this abstract, imagination, so to speak. Imagining things, falsity. That's the biggest anxiety, right, of modern philosophy, modern metaphysics, and modern epistemology since Descartes. So, he's really trying to emphasize that here and how we have to really be careful and try to set limits for ourselves, right? Set limit. I feel like this page really does a good job of that, and that's all important, right? Because of what this first page says about God, freedom, and mortality. These aren't just abstract things about knowledge in general. These are very applicable to just theology and freedom, politics, right, and immortality, which is more broadly metaphysics, but still some theology, still some religious context, right? All these things very important to us still, beyond Kant's time. Huge topics, um, which philosophy is still dealing with extensively. So we need to make sure we're doing it right, right? We need to make sure we have the antecedent examination, just like David Hume did. David Hume, so far, he's really one of the only significant ones in the history of philosophy that's done it to such an extent where it really puts these things at risk, right? So we need to be careful. We need to be careful, right? Or otherwise, you could screw up these very important things that we have for ourselves. So that is that. I think I'm going to end it there. Thank you, everybody. Hopefully, it all made sense, and we will all continue next time with more people. That'd be great. And thank you for sticking with me through this new translation. At first, I was skeptical about this, but it is the more quote-unquote academic edition, like I said before. And honestly, I'm familiar from reading from class, and I think I'll be able to explain it well, and hopefully people understand it with these explanations and conversations we have. So it shall be great. Thank you, everybody, once again, and hopefully, we will see you next time for the next installment of the comprehensive study of Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, one of the greatest works ever, in my opinion. So thank you, and hopefully we will see you next time. Bye-bye.